All right, I think we are live now. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna, and welcome to episode 2 of Why Read, the new discussion series here on my channel. And I'm so excited today to have, or tonight, I should say, to have the page chewing crew here with me. And so I'm going to let them all introduce themselves, but it is so wonderful to have them here because I've talked to them all in different places, but I've never talked to you all three of you at the same time. And so I thought it'd be perfect to have you here and to promote what you're doing with page chewing because I think it's a fantastic other discussion series. And so we'll just start with channel introductions to start out with. So Steve, why don't you start?
Oh, cool. I'm Steve from Steve Talks Books. I mainly read dark fantasy and horror, but I'm open to anything. I venture into other genres once in a while. Anything piques my interest, and I like to talk to people. Lots of long form content like we are doing today. So I feel right at home. So thank you, Joanna, for the invitation. Really appreciate it. And of course, it's always great to be here with Taylor and PL.
Fantastic. And Taylor, we'll go with you next.
Hello, I am Taylor from the BookTube channel, Maybe Between the Pages. You can see it down below. As Steve just mentioned, and Joanna as well, I am part of the page chewing group of hosts. I do mostly read fantasy and sci-fi, but I do branch out as well. This month, particularly, I'm focusing on some classics. So, yeah, I just like to talk about books.
Fantastic. And P.L. Stewart. P.L. Stewart is the author of A Drowned Kingdom. And so we're so happy to have him here as well. But he's also part of Page Chewing. So, P.L., you want to tell us a little bit about your work as an author and your contributions to Page Chewing?
Well, thank you so much, Joanna, for having us. We're so honored, as Steve and Taylor have said. Yeah, I'm P.L. Stewart. I'm the author of the Drowned Kingdom Saga. I'm also an assistant editor and a blogger with Before We Go Blog, as are Taylor and Steve. And of course, I am a co-host of Page Chewing with Taylor and Steve. All kudos to Steve. He is the architect of Page Chewing, and he's too humble to, of course, toot his own horn, but Page Chewing wouldn't exist without for Steve, and we're just so grateful that he's asked us to be part of this wonderful collaboration where we typically feature authors and talk about their works. We usually incorporate some kind of theme related to the author's works, and sometimes we have multiple guests. But it's a fantastic experience that I'm so privileged to be a part of, and it's been great. So just enjoying it.
Wonderful. I'm so happy to have you all here. And thank you to everybody in the chat. We have a lot of friends here. We have Derry, and it says here that her world is quiet. She's awake. Brain is behaving, so likely to stay that way. Yay. I'm so glad you're here, Derry. And Andrew, hello, my friend.
Hi, Andrew.
And Anita. Yay. So fantastic to see you all. And so on this show, we always start with the question, why read? So I guess we'll go ahead. I know we're kind of going counterclockwise, but Steve, why read? When you could choose to do anything else with your time, what makes you right now in your life choose to pick up the book?
I thought about this when I read the title of your new series, and I thought I should probably have a good answer ready. And the first thing that I think the reason that I've gotten more into reading in the last few years is to slow down and to because you can scroll on your phone for hours and it just time disappears, or we can do a ton of other things, but I like the idea of sitting down, and it makes you slow down and take your time. And I like that you have to kind of be aware. You have to be you know aware of what's happening. You have to immerse yourself in text. So, and it's good for your brain too. It's good to exercise that brain once in a while. We all know I need it, so it helps me out. But and of course, it's led to so many different interactions and friendships and conversations that it's just a great. It's great that we can all come together just because we love reading books.
Oh, that's such a lovely answer, by the way, about slowing down, because it's just there's such a hustle culture out there. Uh, it's fantastic. And then, of course, the connection aspect, we always have to mention that as well. So beautiful, beautifully said. And Taylor, and by the way, there's no right or wrong answer to this. And it's mostly just what's coming up for you right now. And it could be different things for different people, different seasons of life, that kind of thing. But what about you, Taylor?
Well, Steve did better than me doing his homework. I did not do my homework, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is kind of based off of a recent video I did, which is about diversity, reading diversely. And for me, I've always read. I am one of those people who read when I was from very young to now. I'm very lucky my parents fostered that in me very young. That was the one thing they would always buy for me. If I wanted a book, I would get the book. If I wanted a video game, I wouldn't get the video game, but I'd get the book. So I think for me, it's always been a way to enter into someone else's world, to see the world from someone else's or another character's perspective. And I don't think it's ever stopped being that for me. So it's not just escapism. I don't want to, dwindle it down to just that. But I think it's kind of a way of traveling without having to physically travel for me. So, and I also second Steve's point about slowing down, because it's kind of nice to just sit on the couch and not do anything else but read a book for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're very well traveled too. I mean, you live in Japan right now, and I cannot remember. Can you remind me where you're from originally?
I'm from the US originally, but I have kind of bebopped around
Yeah.
for a while now.
That diversity video that you lived in Italy too for a short while, or you were taking
I did. Yeah. My Italian is gone. Don't even ask me. But for the time I was there, it was passable. But yes, I have been very lucky to be able to go to many different places. But books are a way to do that without having to travel, I think, as well. So they go well together.
I like that. That's wonderful. Beautiful. And how about you, Piel?
Oh, I certainly echo Taylor and Steve's sentiments. I won't be as articulate as them, I'm sure, but I think one of the things for me is that as a writer, I firmly ascribe to the fact that reading makes you a better writer. I think it's Stephen King that he constantly, world famous writer, he constantly trumpets that and I know maybe that's an old school thought process, but I firmly believe that you soak in writing techniques and vocabulary, and then it just enhances everything. It improves your spelling. You get to decipher words better, and pull out meanings when you read, and so that's for me as a writer. But beyond that, I've always been a reader from a very young age. My mother encouraged me to read. She said that was the gateway to education. By reading. If you can read, you can almost self-educate yourself on such a variety of topics. So if you don't have the opportunity to go to formal schooling, which my mother did it, but for me, she's one of the smartest people I know. And so many positives. Again, to echo Taylor's point about your worldview, it can really widen that worldview if you read an opposing worldview, and it can really enlarge in your perspective on things. And it's just, there's so many benefits. I also read to relax me. I try to read before bed, and if I have time, first thing when I get up in the morning. So that's, if I have a routine, which it's hard to have a routine working shift work, I try to do that, because it's exercise, for your brain. So I definitely believe that reading is extremely important. And being a blogger now and being exposed to all kinds of books, I typically read sci-fi, fantasy, some horror, but thanks to Steve, I think Steve's influence. But it definitely it is a fantastic mental exercise. So
Yeah, that's interesting too. I could definitely echo all of that too. Hello, Joseph. I can echo all that about just how it's sort of like getting inside somebody else's mind or taking on a perspective other than your own. Taylor did a fantastic video everyone should check out on diversity and reading more diversely. And I would love to hear a little more about that video, actually, what inspired that, Taylor. But I think one thing that came to my mind too, when watching that video, was how that is, like, I think I mentioned in my comment to you about, some of the people I've known that I've admired the most in my life have been people who have made the decision that you've made and have made the decision to live in another country and sort of take on a culture other than your own, be in a language other than your own. And I feel like that takes so much courage. I just admire people who've been able to do that. It's something I'd like to do someday, but man, it kind of terrifies me at the same time. But at the same time, I think that's kind of one of the things I love about reading, is that you can take on those other perspectives. And maybe it's not as courageous in some ways as living in another country. But at the same time, I also think that reading a book can be a very intimate experience, because you can be in another country and maybe see other people and how they live and that kind of thing. But at the same time, to read a perspective, it's like you're in that person's mind. I always feel like it's kind of an intimate perspective, an intimate experience in a way, though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll go with the first part, which was, I think, what inspired the video. We could start there.
Yeah.
So, for me, it was just kind of, for lack of a better word, this. Oh, konnichiwa. Yeah. So the kind of the slander that's been attached to the word diversity at this point online, with all of the adaptations that we've gotten. There are discussions that can be had, don't get me wrong, about being true to, source material and things like that. But so often the word diversity gets dragged through the mud as a negative thing, as something that shouldn't be pushed or shouldn't be put on the forefront at the expense of being true to, said source material. And I saw this repeatedly with all of these new adaptations we were getting. And I was like, all right, I'm sick of this. Because to me, well, as I said in the video, that's not what diversity really means. It's not what the actual purpose of diversity is, not the way people are talking about it. And I think that online discourse does have a way of changing the meaning of words. Slowly but surely it gets used in a certain context over and over and over again, and then before you know it, it means something new than when it was first introduced into the discussion. So for me, it felt like that was happening to the word diversity, and I wanted to just talk about my perspective on it and how I viewed it in my reading life, essentially. So that was kind of what inspired it, why I wanted to sit down and talk about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had no idea, by the way, until I watched your video. I thought, is there people having problems with that? But now that you brought up the adaptation thing, I haven't been as much a part of the conversation on adaptations, because I just honestly don't watch very many. But I know that I hear people, and it's mostly just the people who are upset about people who are upset. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what the general, I guess I'm just inferring that people are upset if people aren't represented exactly how they would have been represented when Tolkien wrote,
Right.
The Silmarillion or something ridiculous like that, which I think is just so ridiculous. But
well, I think with the adaptations are what inspired it. So let me back up just a minute. Well, the adaptations are definitely what inspired me to talk about it. But I do think that those kinds of instances are combined with diversity and representation. Those are two different concepts. Okay. And I didn't tackle representation in my video. It would be an interesting thing to tackle in the future, I think, to talk about. But that is what inspired it. But I do think that, basically like having a black dwarf, things like that, right? So that's what sparked a lot of rage with Rings of Power. And I think that's a cross section of a couple different topics, a couple different themes. But for me, I kind of plucked diversity out of that discussion and talked about that specifically. But you are correct that those are the discussions that inspired me to make the video. Exactly. 100%.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
I would just add that, and Taylor's video is just phenomenal. It is. I think, and I in particular, obviously because being a person of color, in reading and seeing a lot of the things that Taylor was seeing, and trying to look objectively as I could as possible. We all have our biases and our prejudices in striving to be objective, and trying to actually sort out what the real issues were. Unfortunately, there was no other conclusion to come to than people were upset because they didn't want to see actors of color portraying what they felt should be white roles. And that's just without even caring about the quality of the acting or the credentials of the actors or anything else. And it really had very little to do, in my opinion, with the staying pure to the book versions of these adaptations. Because because there've been so many other adaptations that didn't feature actors of color, that making all sorts of deviations from the books was fine. Those other deviations are all fine and accepted, but it's problematic somehow when it's about the color skin of the actors. So
Not realistic, PL. Dragons are realistic. Dwarves are not. Okay.
And I love what Steve Toussaint, who's the actor plays Corlys Velaryon in House of Dragon, which I'm loving. The way he just he basically said, you know what, like, that's other people's problem, not mine, right? I'm an actor, right? And I'm not here I'm here to portray the character with as much authenticity as my interpretation of the character is, and like, that's other people's problem. And and obviously I had a sense of outrage about the whole thing because obviously it touched a real chord in me. But at the same time, you realize that you have to sort out the nonsense and the garbage from what's really going on, right? And but I'd like to think that a lot of the actors of color have really won over some people who otherwise because their performances, I think, and I'm trying to objectively, I've heard a lot of good things online about how they've represented those characters. So but the inclusion is a different topic. As Taylor said, the way representation is a different topic, and I think the part of the issue, there's multiple issues. I don't want to drag this out, but diversity representation is one issue, and the diversity inclusion is another issue when it comes to this topic. And I'm hoping that ideally we get to a point, maybe when my great grandkids are my age, that this isn't a discussion anymore, that it's not. But we can always dream. But the inclusion part is that there's a richness in appreciating differences. There's a richness in appreciating differences in people's color, sexual orientation, ethnic background, religion, etc. And just like there's a richness in having different acting styles, interpreting a character, right? And people don't seem upset with those things, but it's all about things that unfortunately shouldn't matter. But anyways.
No, I totally agree. And that's true. There are kind of distinctions in these different kind of categories of looking at this topic. Bookborn, by the way, I don't know if you all follow her, Hillary's channel. She did a fantastic video recently, I think, on the adaptation side of things with diversity and representation. And it was such a nuanced, fabulous video that if anybody's in the chat too wants to check that out, highly recommend. But she was bringing up some really good points about stats and how a lot of stats show that because of the way that we've presented media over years and years, that there have been studies that have shown that the people who have the highest self-esteem as a result, I'm probably oversimplifying what she said, but they're usually like white, cisgender, male, people who, instead, because of the way that they're portrayed in media, and versus females and people of color. And I don't know, I just felt like that kind of really tugged on me, because I just think, I mean, why wouldn't we want more diversity? And especially in fantasy. I think that was something that made me struggle, honestly, connecting with the fantasy genre when I was younger in a way. I think, like you brought this up, Taylor, too, that the case for reading diversely, to read perspectives other than your own, but that at the same time, we also need to see our own selves represented in books as well. Like, we need both. And so I guess I kind of recognize that in myself too, because I know that when I was younger and I was trying to read a lot of, as much as I love Tolkien and everything, but reading that and David Eddings and Elric and things like that, I didn't feel like I got a lot of the female perspective in adult fantasy when I was younger. And I also, so I feel like that was something I didn't realize I was wanting or needing. And also consequently, I feel like even though less so in fantasy today, I do love fantasy that represents other cultures and things like that. But I also find that in books, one of the themes that I love reading about, even if it's, other cultures or other ethnicities or anything, is intersectionality. When somebody comes from a race or ethnic background and they're sort of brought up in a different sort of background. Like, for example, maybe somebody is Korean and their parents are from Korea and they experience Korea one way, but then they come to the US and they're brought up in the US and they don't feel like they're quite Korean enough and they don't feel like they're quite American enough. That intersectionality for me is like, oh, it's like one of my favorite things to explore. I haven't really read any fantasy that explores that, but I guess that's something I kind of relate to personally because I grew up in New Mexico, like Steve, and I'm also Hispanic. But half my family is from Mexico, and so I've always felt a little like different than them whenever I visited Mexico, and I don't know Spanish, and then which is like the shame of my family. But then I also am Hispanic, but it's like that intersectionality thing. So I don't know. I just feel like those things are whenever, even though I haven't read about Hispanic intersectionality as much in books, reading about intersectionality from other people of color has been so meaningful to me in reading. It's been so meaningful to me. So oddly, I feel like
Greenbone Saga. The Greenbone Saga. Read it. Read it. You're gonna love that. It's all over that book.
I should probably revisit it. Taylor, I'm so famous for not having connected with the.
I know, but I'm telling you, if you continue, it's got this intersectionality all over
Alan
it.
will probably unfriend me if I get into it, but he and I both read it together, and he actually kind of liked it a little more than I did, but he kind of got annoyed with all the hype about it's the best thing ever. But I don't know. I might try it again because I know everybody loves it so much, and I don't know. I do feel like I'm missing out on something special, probably.
I mean, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But the theme of intersectionality in fantasy, that series, that's the first thing that popped into my mind. So, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fabulous theme. It's something that, and I plan to read the Greenbone Saga. It's definitely on my TBR. It sounds fantastic. I included that theme in my third book that I'm working on now, and my fourth book especially starts to feature that theme, and with one character specifically. And I think that when you talk about intersectionality, so much of we say that we love a lot of us say we love coming of age stories and stories that feature downtrodden heroes that come out of nowhere and become the chosen one, etc. Intersectionality, I find, is almost like that, because it's someone who feels they don't necessarily fit in, as you described, Joanna, so aptly. Doesn't necessarily know they feel it, they fit in, doesn't know where they fit. Not just not fitting in to the culture or society, but doesn't know where they fit in the spectrum of that society, and and is striving to find that sense of fulfillment or belonging, and that's really poignant stuff. And and I love reading that. But if you equate it to something in like a fantasy trope, it's very much like that whole downtrodden hero that realizes that there's something bigger than they are, or comes from a disadvantaged background and then becomes the chosen one, of the ruler, or whatever. And I think so. Intersectionality is, I think it's a wonderful topic to explore in fantasy, and I love reading about it and can't wait to read more. And that's also compelled me to write about it. So.
Wow, that is such a cool insight, by the way. I have never thought about that with coming of age and how that relates to intersectionality. That's incredible. That is so true. You've just got
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point. Mm-hmm.
It's a really good point. I'm just going to look into the chat here. I think it says more about the people getting upset over other POC playing roles in a fantasy adaptation than it does about the source or the adaptations. 100%, yes. People will complain about anything. Oh, yay! We have Charmaine in the chat. And let's see. I have a favorite author who is Fijian, Indian, and lives here. Neat. And she writes paranormal fantasy. Cool. Let's see. Greenbone Saga. Yes, I know. I probably should. Man, Alan, will you get mad at me?
I'm just saying.
I might try again. I might try again because sometimes books it's with timing too. Don't you all think?
Very
yeah.
much so.
Just read books at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I just need to go in because honestly, I love The Godfather. The Godfather is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think that was kind of my challenge. Is I had an idea of The Godfather, and I know it's supposed to be like The Godfather, but not. I don't know. I don't think it was fair for me to think of it that way in a way.
I would say it's a fair. I would say it's a fair. What's the word I'm looking for? A fair comparison for the world, but not for the story, really.
Yeah. Adaptation for modern audiences needs to be diverse, but the loudest voices tend to be against that for dedication to source material. Thankfully, current author storytellers are more inclusive. Cool. Yeah. So, Steve, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, we've just been
I'd love to hear your
around
thoughts.
you.
Well, I think I think a lot of it's. I think this is this whole situation with the anger behind, these adaptations. I think it says a lot about fandoms, because there's a lot of fandoms that are really toxic and just no matter what you do, there's someone's going to be upset about it. So they're just finding a reason to be upset. What I would like to happen is instead of spending $1 billion on a Lord of the Rings adaptation or a prequel, is to tell some stories from different perspectives and put some of that money into different storytellers and let them create something and adapt a new series. Let's get some new stories out there.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, let's take Gunmetal Gods and
Oh my God, I would watch the hell out of that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I allowed to say
I have
that?
the book. I haven't read it yet, but
So
I
good.
read the book.
Wow, so good.
So
Yeah.
good.
I would watch that. Yeah, 100%.
Because how many stories are out there that we're enjoying that we talk about all the time? I mean, wouldn't you love to see some of that $1 billion spread around to 10 different creators that they could tell their stories from their perspectives, and we can all learn from that. I mean, we'd all learn something. But I do think that self-publishing is really helping this along, because without self-publishing, how many of these stories would we have not heard or not read by now? So I think it's a great way for people to get their stories out there. But I would like to see some of this money they're spending on other storytellers and let them create and let them tell their stories instead of using stories that have already been told. Let's get something new.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I heard Elliot Brooks say that recently in a video. She was saying she created another unpopular opinions tag video, and she was saying that it's not that she's against Lord of the Rings, but it's like, if you're going to make an adaptation, why do another Lord of the Rings adaptation? Why not, when there are so many other stories out there? It just could, you know what I mean? It's like we're trying to ride the coattails of what's already kind of been done, and I don't know. It feels like a little bit of a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
But that is how filmmaking, big budget filmmaking, the traditional publishing industry, that's how they work. If they don't believe it's bankable and it sells, they're much more reticent to take a chance on something that isn't proven and established than to simply reproduce or go back to material that's, they're looking. It's all about money, right? And I understand that, right? But it's funny, how, and this is I think it's pretty well documented how, when they went to, for example, something, they took a bit of a risk with delving into a diverse character, i.e. Black Panther specifically. And we all know how that blew up, right? And that was out of a desire to tap into a diverse audience, which there's millions, right? So, which really turned out to be bang for the buck. I mean, yes, it's Marvel, and Marvel is a well-established franchise, but for them to take, that gamble was still a gamble for them in their mind because, they're very traditional. They're very, and somewhat conservative in the way they view taking those sort of risks. So, that's why, I mean, imagine taking a chance on an amazing self-published book like Gunmetal Gods, right? That there's no, Zemil Akhtar is a great self-published author. He's a great author, period. Forget that self-published tag. And his book is getting popularity. It's really, getting a lot of exposure. But unless he sold millions and millions and millions of copies, the movie industry isn't interested. So, that's, or the television industry. So that's the stark reality, unfortunately, of what we deal with, right? Like, and with adaptation, hey, when I know someone make the Dragon Kingdom saga one day into this multi, blockbuster, yeah, but it's unlikely, considering that that I don't have the profile, and even if I continue to sell books and sell books well, the profile has to be way up in the clouds rather than kind of the floor. So
Yeah.
What's interesting? Oh, sorry, Jonna, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What I was just gonna say is it's interesting hearing us in the book world talk about this versus people who watch these adaptations in the non-book world, because for me too, I really like the point of different stories, because I haven't watched House of the Dragon or Rings of Power because I don't care. Like I don't care. Like,
it's so good though, Taylor. It's so good.
I have heard, so that I might delve into that one. But like I already watched Game of Thrones. I've got my Lord of the Rings trilogy that I love. I don't want to spend my time really watching those. So I definitely feel what you said, Elliot Brooks said, basically. And it's not that I don't love Lord of the Rings, because I do. It's very close to my heart. But yeah, I don't care to watch more of the same, essentially. But if I talk to people, did my audio just change? Am I okay?
No.
Oh, okay. My headphones are, I think, slowly dying. So if my audio changes to the outer speaker, I apologize. But yeah, but when I talk to people outside of the book world, these are huge topics. It's something that a lot of people are engaged with and interested in watching. So it's interesting to kind of compare what maybe book lovers want versus what the broader audience seems to want. Because we want to see our beloved stories, like new ones on the screen, but a lot of people who don't read don't seem to really require that or ask for that. So it's kind of an interesting contradiction I've noticed, not saying, book lovers are the best, although we are, but I do think that it is a difference in priorities or in what we'd like to see, essentially.
Yeah. It's hard not to see. I know I get very zoomed in to the book discussions here. And sometimes I forget, oh yeah, there's like a whole other audience out there that's talking about these things in a very different way, or seeing things from a different perspective than we are. And by the way, I'm with you, Taylor. I have not watched any of the adaptations. I'm like famous for not watching any adaptations. I'm the worst. I'm the worst. And it's not that I'm anti-adaptation. I'm really happy for these adaptations, especially as they bring more people into fantasy. And to be honest with you, I actually might have found BookTube oddly because of when I was getting into watching the Game of Thrones show, because I wanted to find something out there that shared my fury about the last season because I love the books. And so I was a little disappointed with how the show went, especially with the direction things went, And so I found Daniel Green's video. So that's actually how I found BookTube, honestly. So in a way, it kind of brought me here. But at the same time, I don't know why. I don't know why. I could do a video, and it'd probably be an hour long, of all the books I've read and movies and adaptations I haven't watched. It's crazy.
And you made a comment earlier, Joanna, about never really thinking about seeing yourself or hearing stories about yourself, because that didn't really occur to me until later in life either. I never really thought of it that way until later when I realized, oh yeah, so I can relate to your experience in that sense too.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Do you feel
Yeah, it
like
is
you
weird.
found anything like that though, Steve? Especially searching through a lot of self-published books, I'm sure you find a lot of different unique stories and perspectives.
Yeah, I have. I think what used to irritate me before was that all the stories that were people that look like us were people that were usually bad stories. They weren't really good story and positive. So that's changing. So that's a good thing too. But I can't think of anything offhand that I found that really. But I'm sure it's out there.
Yeah, yeah. I always go blank when people are like a character that you identify with. I'm like,
Yeah,
I just can't think of any
yeah.
character I feel like I identify with, really. I can find parts of different characters I identify
Mhm.
with, but not a character where I thought, oh, this is totally me,
Yeah.
Big shout out to Jenny Wirtz, who was a wonderful author person. My favorite standalone novel now of all time to write, Hell's Chasm, features a black protagonist who is, has to endure outright, racism, prejudice, bigotry
Wow.
towards him, and yet he's the one person best equipped to save the day. And I found that was a book, out of many books. I've had the fortune to read books where I felt okay, I can see me, but that was definitely a book that really touched me. That I felt okay, I feel his experiences. I've lived some of those experiences. I see me in this book. Go read Jenny Wirtz, please. She's amazing. I'm currently actually reading Fugitive Prince. This is
Oh, nice.
the fourth book, depending how you look at the series, and it is just marvelous. No one writes like Jenny Wirtz. Her command of the language in the book.
I 100% agree, PL. That book, To Write Hell's Chasm, that was the first book I read of hers. And that book just it's so nuanced in the way she approaches racism, especially with that character. Is it Mikel or Michael? I don't remember how to pronounce the name, but
I believe
it's brilliant.
it's Mikkel.
It is such a good standalone. It just completely blew my mind how good that was, that book. It's still one of my favorites of the year for sure. And probably one of my favorite standalones of all time because it was
Hmm.
just brilliant. Yeah. And actually, I know I've talked to you all. I think you brought it up one time, Steve, about the
Thank
yay.
you, Josh. Thank you so much. I'm honored. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you brought this up, Steve, about the video I did about do you visualize what you read?
Mhm.
One of the reasons I created that video, there were a couple of different books at the time I was reading that made me think about that topic. And honestly, To Write Hell's Chasm was one of them. Because as I was reading her book, it took me a long time to get into her writing style. It's very different. She uses a lot of archaic words. It's in a more formal style, I think, than most modern fantasy, especially. But then there came a certain point where I started like flipping a switch in my brain and I started to like just visualize. I just kind of turned on the visual, like turned up the amp on the visual center or something. I know that sounds weird. I don't even know how I did that. But then the next thing I knew, it was like I flipped on a code or something. It was like code. And suddenly her words came alive and the story came alive and it was so rich. And then when I found out she did the cover art to her own books, she does all the cover art to her own books. She's an incredible visual artist. It completely made sense to me because her books are like art. They feel her command of the language for me, something about it inspires visual reading for me. I don't know if you had that experience, PL, but
Absolutely. And I am a sucker for lush prose. I love the written word. I maybe because of my education, I'm an English major. I was brought up in the classics. I love Shakespeare. So if a book doesn't have that prose element for me, unfortunately, it's tough for me to really truly fall in love with it. To the point where I'm just, I can't not read anything that author writes. Jenny Wirtz is a must-buy author for me because of not so many other things, but her prose is just like it just
Mm.
so
Yes. I agree. And it's funny because the other author that was also inspiring me at that time with this idea was Robin Hobb. So Derry will be happy about that. Derry has a lot of Robin Hobb content on her channel. But there's something about the way Robin Hobb writes too that just, I don't know, like it was like a movie happening in my, it was definitely like a movie on the page or something for me.
And Jenny Wirtz is such an amazing person, not only an author, but just
Oh,
if just listen to her talk and you just want to, you feel like you can conquer the world. So yeah, really great.
yeah, she's brilliant. Both the discussion that she had on your channel with the Friday conversations the week before I was on your channel for that with Stephen Erickson, when she was talking about Grimdark and how she believes that stories, she believes in not being afraid to tackle dark aspects to her stories, but at the same time, she doesn't feel like you should land in a place of hopelessness. And then Stephen Erickson echoed that the next week, and that inspired me so much. I thought, yeah, like that. There's something that's, I think that's why I love fantasy, because there's this idea of wonder. And what is wonder if it's not an openness to hope, if it's not an openness to expansion, if it's not an openness to eternity in some weird way. So that really resonated with me. And just authors like her, she just is so inspiring, so inspiring. Every time I hear her talk, I just feel uplifted and I feel inspired.
I haven't had the pleasure of reading.
Oh, I think your mic went out.
Your mic, yeah, mic went out. Sure. I'll just really quickly read what Brandy said. I really feel our New Mexican and Hispanic culture in the Expanse books. Interesting. I really enjoyed picking up on those influences, not knowing the author is from where we live. Really? I didn't know that the author was from there.
Yeah, I think in Santa Fe, I think they live. But yeah,
Ah.
there's lots of references to New Mexico and green chili and hatch and
What?
yeah, the language, some of the language that some of the characters use is right out of what you would hear. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And Cibola Burn, it's Cibola National Forest.
Oh, okay. I don't think I've ever been to Cibola. Is that? I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
Wow, that is wild. I had
There's
no
a lot.
idea.
Yeah, they reference there's a few different cities like Alamogordo they reference, and they reference there's a few different places they reference, and it's pretty. I was surprised that they reference it so often, but yeah, it's pretty neat.
Oh my goodness.
Just a sound check. Am I okay now?
You're okay
Okay.
now.
All right. Hopefully my headphones will hold their charge for the rest of this rookie mistake, but here we are. But what I was trying to say a second ago is that I haven't had the pleasure of reading Jenny Wirtz's work yet, but I have had the pleasure of talking to her. But hearing you guys talk about prose, I actually just finished reading the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I finished that last night. And it's such a short book. It's just like 88 pages. But when you talk about visualizing a world, the prose in that story is incredible. I was transported to it. So yeah, I would highly recommend. It's a quick read. You could do it in one sitting, but it was wonderful. 5 stars for sure.
That's cool. And by the way, Jimmy, how dare you?
I actually agree with Jimmy. I think it's because I'm a miserable human being, but yeah, I don't need hope, but I can understand the that thought process. So
he also knows I'm reading
oh, nice.
the anti-hope book right now, so maybe I don't either.
Yeah, Joanne and I were just talking about that book before joined, and I said I love Baker. I love his work. It is fantastic, but I needed a break after reading that because it was so nihilistic. It was so dark, and I was reading a lot of dark stuff already in Malazan. Again, I blame Steve for a lot of these choices. So, but yeah, I needed and I understand though, because I write a lot of dark stuff. It's dark in a different way. It's morally dark, rather than some of the other fare that I've read. But I think the one thing about darkness in fantasy is that the realism in some of these books really, really draws you in, right? And I think horror. It's kind of like it's kind of has that tilt towards horror. Like that stuff really, as I get older, I find I'm really drawn to it. And I think because you're trying to make sense of life and the world around you and things that are happening, and you're looking for, and I'm not saying these books are going to provide answers necessarily, but just exploring the topics and looking at different lenses and different sides. And I know for me with my writing, and Steve and Taylor have both read my book, that it's more about, I think when we increase our understanding, then we increase our capacity to address things, right? Issues that we have within ourselves. So I think that's one thing that I love about reading dark fantasy, is that, sometimes it can really get you to be introspective, and if you're struggling and grappling with an issue, it can really help you look at that issue with a different lens, and perhaps even provide some potential answers, if you want to call it that. So.
Yeah,
I definitely agree with that. I also think that it allows you, I think I've said this before in a live, but it allows you the distance to look at something, even if it's something you're struggling with in your life or something that you really should be thinking about. If it's too close to you, as humans, we shy away from those difficult thoughts. But I do think that, dark fantasy, grimdark, whatever the genre may be, allows you to have that space because you're not reading about it in your life, but it does allow that introspection in a more free form. I definitely agree with PL there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm having kind of a dark month, which is appropriate for October, right? Because I'm reading this right now. At the beginning of the month, I finished Sons of Darkness by Gaurav Mohanty, which is a pretty bleak book as well. And then I reread The Child Thief by Brahm, which is a very, very dark Peter Pan retelling that mixes King Arthur allusions with Peter Pan. It's brilliant. And Brahm is not only a very talented artist, but he's a brilliant writer, in my opinion. I loved it. I love that book, but it is very dark, like major trigger warnings, even for the first couple of pages. But yeah, I'm having a very dark month. And then after this, I'm going to be jumping back into Elric. So goodness. And then I thought for a second of picking up the audiobook of a nonfiction called I'm Glad My Mother Died. And it's so funny if you see the cover of that book, because it's like very happy looking. It's pink and yellow, and the girl is in a dress and looks kind of peppy. And then I decided I just can't do it. That's probably going to be the darkest book I read this month if I pick that up. And believe it or not, because it's nonfiction. So I feel like that almost is too real, and I can't do it.
That book is by like a child acting star, right?
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah. What was she in? I could see her face right now, but it's not.
It's iCarly, I think. I never watched
iCarly,
it,
maybe.
but
Yeah. So.
Wow. And that's a great point, PL, about finding hope in those dark stories. Like I think you just finished Obsidian Awakening too by Sienna Frost. That book inspired me, and that's a very dark book, but it was inspiring. Yeah,
love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so I don't believe art owes anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes down to timing too, right? So it doesn't owe you optimism, but maybe it's not the time to pick it up, Like I think we as readers need to be aware too of the mood we're in, right? So if we're not ready for something that's gonna just crush our soul, maybe we shouldn't pick up something at that moment,
I think it's the way everything that Jimmy is saying and that you all are saying, I mean, about, and everybody in the chat who is basically saying we don't need optimism. I think that's fair. And I do think that is something that's nice about books. Just like what I think Taylor is saying too, the psychic distance that you have, because you can close a book. So that's a nice thing, is you can explore these dark topics. You can kind of go into a secondary world, but then you can also close the book. So I guess that is kind of the nice thing. And I think you're right. I think maybe something you were hinting at, PL, is the idea that, I mean, that is a way to sort of grapple with those parts of our psyche that are very much part of us, right?
Yeah, and a lot of those topics, unfortunately, are uncomfortable sometimes, and it's uncomfortable to deal with and to address. But perhaps there's some level of catharsis sometimes when you tackle these topics, and perhaps you can find some meaning as to the, I mean, a lot of the topics that dark fantasy explores, these are topics that have confounded humankind for centuries, right? And I think that's like for me, when my books, racism, is a big theme, colonialism, and that's something that humankind has dropped goblins for centuries. So it's not going away anytime soon. But why is that? And is there anything we can do about that? Like those are just some of the things that I know I broach in my books, and some of the books that I've found the most compelling are books that broach those types of subjects that we grapple with for all this time, and everybody thinks that we're going to reach this nirvana where suddenly it'll disappear. But how's that going to happen if we don't look the thing squarely in the eye and from all sides, right?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And I like that you used the word catharsis, because I know this argument has been going back as far as Plato and Aristotle. Because if Plato basically didn't, I know, learning this through the music lens, that he was not really a fan of people listening to dark toned music or music in modes of music that were considered more dreary, so to speak. He wasn't a big fan of tragedies, things like that. And then the reason why is because he thought if people are consuming that kind of media, then people are going to be sad. And if we have sad people, then we're feeding sadness into the society. And so sad society equals unhealthy society, so on and so forth. And then Aristotle came around and was basically saying tragedy has value because of catharsis, because it can have kind of a purifying effect on the soul to be able to consume things that are tragic or sad. And so it's interesting that we still see arguments like that even to this day. I mean, I remember when Columbine happened, and a lot of people were blaming Marilyn Manson because that was what I guess the person was listening to at the time. But I still think that those things serve a purpose, like you said, and they can. And I don't know. I think what Philip said is perfect. I personally like some beauty and hope, which can confer meaning in the midst of suffering. I would say, I know it's going to sound weird, but I sometimes find, I guess that's what catharsis is, right? I find sort of some odd, weird, I guess the opposite too. I find some kind of odd hope and light in being able to look at dark material sometimes. Maybe that's another way of putting it.
Yeah, the good thing is that there's no right or wrong answer. It's just everyone has what they prefer, and it's nice to have options. So whoever enjoys what they enjoy, they can find stories that fits their reading tastes. But there were some time when I was reading PL's book, The Drone Kingdom, when I had to stop myself and look at the name on the book. Did PL write this? There's some dark moments in that one.
Oh, I'm scared to read it.
I had moments like that too, where I was like, "This is not the man I know."
I think I said that. I said something kind of similar when I first talked to Janie Wirtz. I think that was like one of the first things I told her. I said, I always looked at you on Twitter and I thought, what a sweet person. She seems like such a nice person. And wow, she is so mean to her characters. I had no idea that I was going to be in for that kind of ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, as writers, if we don't put our characters through pain, then we don't get the payoff for the readers in the end, right? And emotional journeys and journeys that as writers, we're looking for something to resonate. I'm not as concerned if you like my book or not, but I want you to remember it, right? Do you know what I mean? Like I would love people to like my book. I'd love you to love the first one and buy the second one, love the second one and the third one, etc. But what I'm most concerned about, to be honest with you, as a writer, is that it leaves an impression, right? And because we've read plenty of books that they're wonderful and they're lighter, they're a typical murder mystery, like you used to call them dime store paperback to pick it up and read it, and the plot's kind of similar to the ones you read before, and read it's great, and then that's it, and it's forgotten, it's out of your brain, it's flushed, right in the next few hours, but I know as a writer, and I'd like to think that most writers feel this way, is that I want to write something that leaves a lasting impression and something that you think about aspects of the book long after you finish reading it, and that, you know, even if you didn't like it, even if you did like things about it, that it still, left that, kind of indelible mark. So
That's absolutely got to be the case. Yeah. Yeah. Was there any particular review that made you feel like, oh, that person got what I wanted them to get out of it? Do you get reviews like that? Probably often, huh?
yeah, I'm pretty fortunate. I've had some very good reviews. I've had some unfavorable ones, but even I think the ones on the best reviews are the unfavorable ones where they don't criticize the writing, which I'm honored that they had no issue with the writing or other elements, but it's more about I hate author and I can't stand him. I can't read about this guy. He's just so horrible and blah blah blah. So and if that's the reaction, if I invoke if if my work is emotive, if I'm drawing that strong reaction to people, it's meant to garner a strong reaction. He's meant to garner a reaction, and the things he does and the way he thinks, and the part of the society that his views on society are meant to garner a strong reaction. So that's a good thing because that means you're thinking about these things, right? And it isn't necessarily a comforting, cozy book that it's about a person who's very flawed and his thinking is very flawed, but it's about the journey and how much will he change, to what degree can he change, and will that change be able to impact and help and save the people around him because he's in a position of authority. And and it's very much a morality tale for the most part about someone like that who we live with, know maybe our sister, mother, brother, father, boss, colleague. That's who authoring is every person. He's meant to be someone who has positive points and points that aren't so favorable, but yet the points that aren't so favorable impact others, and that's what is at the heart of homophobia, racism, all these issues. Is that unfortunately, if you could just lock yourself in a room and it's just you're shouting at the walls and it's just you, that's your own issues and it does affect others. But when these issues typically affect others around you, and that's what
Yeah. Fantastic. Oh man, I'm
It
really
comes
looking
through.
forward to it.
It
Yeah,
comes through. So
that's
all of that, all of
exciting.
those themes.
Let's be honest, I'm a Hobbs stan. Yeah, I know how to make Jerry happy in any conversation, so I just have to bring up Robin Hobb, which
I'm
is
still putting off Assassin's Quest.
yeah.
I'm still putting it off. Like, and
Oh,
it's
there's no
I
rush.
don't know. It's I want to read the end of the story, but I'm just so conflicted. I think I've mentioned before, and I think you've mentioned as well, Joanna, that you've had the same feeling. But in the middle of it, I feel like it's a slog, and then after, I'm like, I'm so glad I read that. But like, Assassin's Quest is huge, and I'm like, am I ready for that
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, it's very slow. I can honestly say that. And and I always say that if I think a book is slow, then it has to be really slow because my meter seems off compared to most readers. I was never bored. I wasn't bored with it, but it did feel slow. It did feel slow. And there were things that happened though in that book though, to be honest with you, that I'm still thinking about and that I'm still processing. So I would be curious to hear your thoughts if you get to it, if you finish it.
By the end of the year, I'm hoping. But that's coming soon. That's what, 2 months?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we are in October.
It looks like Philip got ahead of me. Philip, I'm not quite halfway through this yet, but I'm really enjoying it so far. And I'm probably going to take my time with it because there is so much to process in this book. There are so many. I was talking about this with PL before we went live, but I'm having a time with the many, many names and locations that are just sort of dropped in conversation and not really thoroughly developed, like explained, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that, but it just means I'm spending a lot of time in the appendices for this book.
Yeah, that's one
There's a
where,
great appendices. So
yeah, it's really great to have that appendices in that one for sure. But we did, we read that one I read it with a couple of readers and we would talk for hours about one chapter. So it really helped me to break it down slowly. So like you said, your approach, that's good way to take it. There's so much in that book. It's insane.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge. I was telling PL that for me, the reading experience has been that I'm kind of vague on certain things, and then I'll read the next chapter and I'll suddenly have context for the chapter before. And I know Stephen Erickson does that too. I've often found like I'll tab the heck. I'm a tabber. I know people say, "Oh, you don't have to take a single note with Malazan." I am a note taker and I'm a tabber. And so when I was reading Malazan, I would tab up my books like crazy, and then I would go back at the end to my previous tabs, and I would get so excited because some of the things I'd tab, I'm like, I know what this means now, and I understand this, and it's like a big puzzle that comes together for me. So I guess I enjoy that.
Yeah, I'd mentioned that actually reading Malazan helped me read Baker, because it's that type of book where you're thrown in the deep end, and with all this vast history and backstory and cultures and magic and all these things, and then you have to absorb it, and you basically it's force fed to you, and then okay, well, are you going to read and still enjoy the book, or are you going to get lost in the rest of it? And for those of you who read Malazan, I know Steve, you have obviously, you can find yourself just incredibly feeling over your head and overwhelmed, and like and not being able to just enjoy the write, because the writing is beautiful. Enjoy the story, because the story is it's great storytelling. And we've had the benefit in being the community of having the scholars such as the AP Canavans and the Philip Chases help us through our journey in reading books that are that immersive and comprehensive. But I know that for me, reading Malazan specifically has really helped me read books like Backer, right? Because of the way that it's similar in that context, that yep, here you go, here's all this information, and
Yeah. And for me, it really helps that I love his prose. I love his prose so much.
So good.
I think that makes it so much more of an easy experience for me, because if I'm not really fully connecting to the way a person writes, it can be a little bit more of a tedious journey, but it just so happens I absolutely love the way he writes. So
yeah, prose is beautiful. I recommend, she's another great author who's been on Page Doing in the past, and Steve's featured on his channel on other occasions. Anna Smart, just her series,
Empires of Dust.
Empires of Dust is just and the writing is just beautiful, and it's extremely dark. I found it as one of the darkest books that I've read, if not close. It's up there. It's extremely dark, but beautiful prose.
I need to check that out. And I especially am interested in female self-published authors who write adult fantasy. Grimdark, especially, I don't ever hear about female grimdark authors ever.
There's
traditionally published, but yeah.
Well, she's traditionally published, but even then, I don't really hear many of them.
There's Sienna Frost, H.L. Tinsley. There's we just had a couple of guests last week on Page Doing. There's Crystal Matar. She's Legacy of the Brightwash. Help me out here, guys.
Those were the first three that came to my mind as well, but I know that there's others as well. I don't know if the Iron Crown is considered grimdark. It might not be.
I don't know. I thought it was
right.
It's dark. The wonderful Virginia McLean, her stuff is fairly dark. A lot of it's
I've heard that name. Yeah.
World building. Her stuff, great, amazing books. Janisaki, great. She's dark fantasy. Like, I find that a lot of the female writers that I've read to are more dark. I'd consider more dark fantasy than like grimdark. There's some wonderful female authors period out there. February she wrote, reading books in the month of February dedicated to female authors. That's a great endeavor, and that's when I got to a lot of great authors, and so yeah.
Yeah.
And Brandy mentioned in the chat, Halo Scott's another one. That's a great, very dark
stuff. Yeah.
Very dark, but self-published fantasy, dark fiction.
Yeah.
That's a list worth compiling, I think, in the future.
I know. I need to write a huge list. And I did get some good recommendations, I think, from you, Taylor, and from some other people on the self-published basic TBR video I made.
Mhm.
So I know I need to keep that list handy and just write it all down somewhere, because yeah, I think that's good to shout that out. And I think that is the kind of hard part is, you know, we see a lot of hard things. I know that some of the books I've read that are grimdark, not all of them, maybe I should say, but a lot of them, there's not a lot of positive things that happen to women, I should say. I don't know how to put that in a nicer way. It's just, it wouldn't be comfortable to be a female in that in those worlds. And I know people could say, oh, well, it's not comfortable to be a male either. I'm like, yeah, but
Yeah.
I still think I still see a difference. And I know people are trying to be realistic, but I don't know. That's a whole other conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, as long as we're also having as well those stories that depict women in positions of power, authority, ruling kingdoms, which happened in real history. As long as we're also having those stories side by side that are presenting, that other, narrative that women held power and did all kinds of phenomenal things and built bridges and roads and languages and were warriors and did all those things that were traditionally thought of as being male role.
Mhm.
And as long as we're exploring the Boudikas and like as long as we're doing that, then that's but yeah, it is an unfortunate reality that the oppression of women, especially in a medieval context, it's so harsh, and it is rather depressing when you consider how they're treated.
Yeah.
I feel like for me as a reader, you can tell when the author puts it in for a reason. Okay, so if it's just in there for gratuitous violence or a scene for shock value, for me, that annoys the hell out of me. Not gonna lie, but if it's something for the development of not just a stepping stone for a main character, but if it's a development of the plot or the world, or it serves a purpose, for me, that is something much more palatable, right? And I think it's pretty obvious to readers which one it is when you read,
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's definitely a way to do that in a way that has a purpose, like you said.
I want to say one thing that I think I'd like to think that Steve and Taylor and myself with Page Chewing, one thing we've done is, I mean, we feature authors of both traditionally and self-published, but we tried to shine a light on self-published authors, and that includes people from diverse backgrounds, women, and I think the more and more, one thing that's been a benefit to us is that we've learned about just how many they are, right? And we got to meet these fabulous people. They're all wonderful, and hopefully helping to give them some exposure, exposing them to readers and viewers. But I think there needs to be more and more of that on BookTube. There needs to be more and more of that, I think, and a lot of booktubers are doing that, and a lot of phenomenal booktubers like yourself do that, Joanna. But there needs to be more of that, especially in terms of self-published fantasy. But I think the corner is turning, because you do see booktubers, and we've talked about this in previous Page Chewing, with large follower numbers that are, they're holding up a book, and this is a self-published book, and this is a traditional book, and there's no difference. They love it equally, and it gets that hype going about books. And when people realize self-published, like, oh wow, and then it's just making people understand the caliber of self-published writing is on par certainly with traditionally published, and that's and also because self-published writing is so diverse and has all these diverse perspectives and these stories that you wouldn't find necessarily in traditional publishing. That's where you're seeing that value in reading those type of books. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something else I really enjoy about the long form content, like this conversation that we're having right now, and also Page Chewing, especially with Page Chewing specifically because it's like more of an interview format. What I enjoy about that is it's what we call evergreen content, right? So whenever someone discovers these amazing self-published authors, if they Google them or they search them in YouTube, that will always come up. And so I just love the fact that there is information out there now for someone who may have just discovered this world and they want to get to know the authors a little bit. They can, it's evergreen, it's out there forever. So that's something I really enjoy when I reflect on, how like the content that we create as a group and also individually, how I want that to live in posterity. It's really nice to have that long form content with those authors, knowing it's out there.
Mhm.
Brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. Same thing with even with reviews too. I know everybody always talks about how reviews don't get a lot of views, but I mean that's evergreen content. And if you're doing a review on a self-published author, it might not get as many reviews as if you were doing a Brandon Sanderson review, but at least that gets some attention. And over time, I think that's there. And those are going to be, I think, come to the forefront if you search for those particular books versus if you look for a Sanderson review, you're probably going to get like a million different videos. So that's another thing to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, kudos again to Steve, who was featuring and interviewing self-published authors long before Page Chewing, and
100%.
And that he's brought a lot of us, a lot of attention has been drawn because of people like Steve and what they've been doing and featuring self-published authors in their works, and many people getting to know self-published authors because one of the things I'll say is that we're pretty approachable, and you typically don't have to get through a gauntlet of an agent to get to us. You don't have to, you DM us, we'll answer. We respond to threads on social medias about we're pretty approachable, and it's great that again, thanks to Steve for starting Page Chewing, that we've that conduit, that direct conduit to self-published authors has been realized. And I think, I can just DM PL, or if I post on what his book, he's going to respond. Like that's and that's how the self-published community is, right? They're very open. They're open to engaging. They love doing it. So yeah, it's great that people are seeing that about self-published authors.
It's a fantastic thing that you all are doing. Yeah, it really is. And I definitely have found a lot of authors through that. So I appreciate that you all are doing that. Yeah. So I want to circle back around. You were talking, I think, earlier, PL, about when we were talking about The Darkness That Comes Before, about videos and reading Malazan, and videos like APs, for example, that really get you to analyze and slow down and look at things. And then it kind of made me think back to the beginning of the video when, Steve, you were talking about the why read question. For you, it's about slowing down. And I think that is so not appreciated in today's, I guess the common term I keep hearing these days is toxic productivity. That we have, and we even see that, I think, and I've heard this actually in a couple of videos recently outside of BookTube, of people who criticize BookTube, who are like literary, I guess, classical type of reader channels, and they said there's this thing called BookTube, and they show off about how many books they read per month. And they were like kind of making fun of us. And so I don't know, I just find that really interesting, because at the same time as I saw a lot of snobbery in a couple of those videos, I won't lie, I still also saw a lot of wisdom in what some of these people were saying too, that there is a beauty to slowing down, and that maybe patience is something that we might have lost sight of in our culture and even here on BookTube in some ways, and I'm not above that. I have that too. And I noticed you did a wonderful video recently on reading slumps. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I figured you probably did that because I know a lot of people who say they have reading slumps. And I also wonder if that's maybe a symptom, not necessarily a cause, but a symptom of just the hustle and the feeling that you need to read so many books at once and get through so much at once. So I just wondered about your thoughts on that, and if there was anything in particular if that inspired you. I know I'm kind of planting that, but or if there was something else that inspired you for that.
Well, it was that, and also Yulene, our good friend Yulene Reeds, had been going through a slump lately too. But I think it's hard to not get caught up in the numbers game sometimes, and I'm never going to be the person who reads 20 books a month. I'm just not going to happen. That's just not me. And if I did, I wouldn't enjoy any of them. I wouldn't absorb anything. So that's kind of where it came from, is just, it's okay to not read sometimes. Take a break. You don't have to read every single day. If you don't feel like reading, then don't read. You don't have to feel that pressure. This is for fun. So If you're not enjoying yourself, then do something else. Go out, get some fresh air, exercise, watch TV, do whatever makes you happy. You don't have to read every single day. But I do think it's interesting that I've seen some of those videos too about kind of poking fun at BookTube, and uh, my thing is that if I don't like certain content, I just won't watch it, and they're free to make whatever they want, and if that's what makes them happy, then so what? Well, who am I to criticize what they do? If they want to if they want to create content that I didn't enjoy, I'll just skip over it. I won't watch it. So that I don't really understand that kind of attitude of this shouldn't be done. It's like, why? If someone wants to create content and has an audience, then they're free to do what they want, and they can create what makes them happy and what they think is worth sharing. So I just don't understand that attitude of kind of, I know, of course, it's good to be introspective and see what we're creating, what we're doing. And of course, it's always good to do that. But to tell someone else, you shouldn't be doing this because you shouldn't be making a certain kind of video about books or about book hauls but don't watch it. If you don't like it, then don't watch it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel kind of bad because the videos weren't necessarily anti-booktube. Like that wasn't the purpose of the video. The purpose of the videos were like to promote reading more slowly and taking your time, and particularly with classical literature, which does take a lot more time and effort to slow down and read. And so there was some criticism about how there's this whole booktube culture and it's about reading as fast as you can. And I don't think they meant to be as snarky sounding as they came across. It was more like, that there's something really beneficial. I think they were more trying to promote taking time with the book rather than but they did end up kind of putting down people.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the presentation and how they approach conveying their ideas. And there's one thing to say, these are ways you can slow down to enjoy reading, and there's another to go after certain people or certain types of content is just, I don't think that's productive. And I don't the same as with certain genres or certain people who say this genre shouldn't exist because this not really fantasy or it's not really this, or it's like, why do you care about whether certain genres or whatever exists? Don't read it. If you don't enjoy those stories, then don't read them. That's okay. Everyone enjoys different things, and if it's whether it's a book or a video or movies or whatever it is, and let them enjoy it. Let them have their fun with it. And we can all. There's plenty of stuff we can all absorb that we'll enjoy. So let everyone enjoy what they want to enjoy.
Oh yeah. No, I thought it was kind of funny that the videos I saw were kind of, it was one in particular that I'm thinking about that was kind of making that kind of statement, because I thought you kind of are almost losing me because I was with you. I kind of wanted to join your team in a way. I wanted to, because I want to read more classical literature. I want to, get into things like that. But then if you're talking down on the genres I love, you're almost like not recruiting me in a way. So
well, that goes back to the issue of, and I think we've talked about some previous Patreon, that there's room for every type of discourse on books, whether that's extremely highbrow, intellectual and analytical, and or whether it's much more brass tacks about this is why I like the book and blah blah, and that's a great thing. It makes it rich, and it makes it and I mean and so many of us appreciate and love all these different types. I love watching something really insightful and the in-depth analysis of an AP or Philip Chase, and I like watching something less than that more tells you about, hey, well, this is what you might like about this, is what I like, how many pages it is, this is what the plot threads are, like those are like, why can't we just acknowledge the fact that, hey, first of all, you can like many different types of things and there's room for everything, and the fact that makes everything so much better. And that we started this discussion, like part of it, about diversity and inclusion. Like, it's okay, all these differences and all these different types of discussion and booktube versus the more intellectual type analysis versus that's okay. We can like and enjoy them all, and there's room for all of them, and it's a good thing, right? Life would be pretty boring if we didn't have differences like that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
Very well
absolutely
said.
agree. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree.
And
Yeah,
Taylor,
I
we've talked about
go
this,
ahead.
Taylor, about gatekeeping. Just wanted to.
Oh
We've
yeah.
talked about that before, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's I mean that's exactly what I was going to bring up because basically that's the word I think we're all dancing around is gatekeeping. So, you know, um fantasy is notorious for gatekeeping in and of itself. But ironically, classic lit people tend to, poo poo on fantasy as well. So it's interesting how the hierarchy works within the literary world or what the perceived hierarchy is. But I think for me, what stuck out from what you said, Joanna, was the speed of things. And I think maybe what some of the analyses that you mentioned may have been leaving out of the discussion is the fact that this content doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a space where instant gratification and having to upload multiple times a week. These pressures do exist, especially in the booktube medium, which is what we're talking about, right? So I think if you do more analytical stuff, you can talk about one book maybe for a month and analyze that. But that's a very niche group of people who are going to watch that video, the people who are reading at the same time as you or have read that book. But if you want to reach a larger audience, reading more books or more genres or having more to talk about is incentivized. So I think that that's something that is important to include in the discussion as well when it comes to creating content, because it's not in a vacuum, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's such a good point. Yeah, that's such
mhm.
a good point.
Yeah, slowing
Um,
down personally is a great choice, I think. But I think we need to, when we talk about content specifically, yeah, it needs to be a bit more nuanced, maybe.
yeah, for
Hmm.
sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I by default am a slow reader. I wish I could
Hmm.
read faster. I think it'd be great. And I do understand that pressure too, especially having a channel. I think there is a certain amount of pressure to read a certain amount per month and be able to talk about what you're reading and that so and so forth. But man, I'd hate for this to ever feel like a job or, like
Hmm.
that just, it's just too bad in a way. And it does, I do think that that term did stick out to me in the video that I'm thinking about. That toxic productivity. I know I've heard it in a few different videos, honestly, but I thought about it. I'm like, oh man, I hope that's not going to be the case for me. Because, like, for example, the other day I didn't read very much at all. I just read a little bit. And I was thinking, and I was finding myself being a little hard on myself, like, oh, you didn't read enough today. And I thought, wait a minute, watch that thought.
Vlogs, I have a very interesting relationship with vlogs because they do really, really well, but man, do they suck to make. Like I'm just gonna put it out there because like when you're just doing I mentioned earlier in my channel monetizing your free time. And I don't mean just by money, I just mean by making it a productive time rather than just a relaxing time. So instead of just sitting down to read a book, if you're filming a vlog, you should film yourself reading that book. But then if it's 2 in the morning and you don't look so good and you're like, well, I really need this, this footage or, in order to make the vlog look good, like vlogs are hard and they take a lot of your personal time and put it on the screen if they're well made. So I think that's a really interesting form of content that is super popular right now all over booktube is reading vlogs. They're like the tippy top. So I've taken a break from that type of content because I felt myself putting that pressure, on myself. But yeah, there's a lot of incentive to make that content.
Wow. I've never
Mhm.
done one before. And every time I pick up a book, I really have thought about doing a reading vlog, which I think would be so hilarious, honestly, because this isn't the type of book that really, I don't know. It just seems like it'd be a funny book to vlog about. Um,
I would
They're
love to
good
see
for
that.
introspection. They're really good for introspection. Like you can look back on your thoughts. Like you said that you tab and then get a new view of
Mhm.
your tabs. You could get that real time, so that there are benefits to it, don't get me wrong. It's just a
Yeah,
different type of work.
it seems like it. Yeah, it seems like it might be a different type of work. They are fun to
Hmm.
watch, though, for sure. I can
Hmm.
understand that, especially because, like, I think, like I said, I don't know if I articulated this very well earlier, but I do feel like it's an intimate experience when I read somebody's books, and I feel like I'm taking on their perspective. I'm taking in I'm going into a form of consciousness, if that makes sense. If I'm going into a different state of consciousness that this author has created, or this world this author has created. And to me, there does feel like a merging that happens when I read a book. And so sharing that kind of almost feels like a personal experience in a weird way. But I also find that that's what I admire about good authors too. I'm like, especially when an author can open up and take risks, because I just think that has to take some courage. So I don't know. I think there's some courage basically in doing a vlog, because you're being open about your experience as you're reading it. But as much as there is courage in being able to write books and go into some heavy themes and explore some challenging content as far as what humans go through.
Yeah, a lot of courage by booktubers to put themselves out there, put themselves on camera, to leave that, as Taylor said, that impression that's, it's not going anywhere, and it can be always researched, Googled. Writing a book. I've said this before in previous, Taylor and Steve, you know me well, that writing a book is, once you write the book, you realize it's no longer yours. And that's a difficult thing to grasp as an author at first. But then after you've written the book and, it's your baby and you've put it out there, then it becomes the readers, and it's the readers, impressions and thoughts and how they interpreted what you wrote. And, I'll get a review that picked up some inside review. I didn't write the book like that, but wow, that's brilliant that you saw that, even if it wasn't necessarily what I intended. And but you realize it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the reader, and it belongs to the reader's viewpoint of what your book is. And you kind of have to let it go, almost like a child. You have to let that go and let that interpretation stand in the reader's mind, and accept that's what they thought of your book. And that's, I think that's, because the same way you talked about, there's this pressure about, as a booktuber, having to be conspicuous in what you're reading and also very prolific. As an author, there's the same thing. And when you put books out there, it's scary, right? It's a scary experience. And you're hoping that someone will feel the same way about your book that you do. But that's impossible, because they're different. We're all different people, right? So, and again, like I said, I think what authors are striving for is that lasting impression, regardless of how someone feels about the book. But it is a scary experience. I can say that with firsthand knowledge. It is scary for your book out in the wild and wonder what people are going to think.
I just admire it so much. For me personally, I'm not a fictional writer, so it blows my mind that anybody could write a work of fiction and make it come together. So I think it's something I admire so thoroughly. I'm going to change gears. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to basically reinforcing what you guys have said, but going back to what you said earlier, Joanna, about and thank you very much about respecting people who go abroad. That's a different type of courage, and I don't think I could write a book. So I'm just saying, I have so much respect for people who write a book and put it out there, because that's a part of you that you're putting out there for people to handle. So just wanted to basically reinforce what you said, that I really respect authors for being able to do that, because that's a different type of courage.
It really is. And just echoing what, Derry echoed me here, that she agreed so much. And I know Derry, whenever I hear Derry talk about how much she connects to Fitz or to any of the characters in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, they feel like real people. You feel like you know them. And so it's just amazing how authors can do that. Create these people that you feel like you feel such a deep connection to. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and change gears a little bit, because Steve, I really admire how in all of your weekly update videos, you always ask your audience questions. And I just feel like you probably have so much wisdom, especially as you always are. I think it's one thing to have a great answer to a question. I wanted to make my series, the name of my series is a question, why read? Because I just think there's an art to a really good question, even more so than to the answer to a question sometimes. But I would love to hear from you. Is there anything that you feel like you've any great insights or any wisdom you've learned from your viewers as a result of asking questions?
That's a great question.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. It really is a good question. I've learned a ton from people from those answers that sometimes I ask because I have no idea what the answer would be, or I just want to hear different perspectives. So yeah, I've learned a ton about just different viewpoints of different choices people make or why they make them, and like audiobooks. I didn't listen to audiobooks for a long time, but hearing from viewers who were answering questions, they gave their experiences of audiobooks and how they help them. So I gave it another try, and I listened to a Drawn Kingdom audiobook, which is a great audiobook, by the way. It's fantastic. So it's a perfect audiobook to start my audiobook journey with. But yeah, there's a ton of different things. I'm drawing a blank on a specific example, of course, but every week I learn something. That's why I try to always ask my audience a question to kind of engage with them too, and just to kind of get the back and forth.
Yeah, I love that. So it's just as much fun in a way to watch Steve's videos as it is to kind of see how people answer his questions, because they're such good questions. So I admire that so much. That's interesting that you brought up audiobooks too, because I personally used to be so against audiobooks when I was younger, and I've totally changed my tune on that over the years. And I have to say that BookTube has influenced that tremendously. And I feel like that's the case for almost everybody who has gotten into this community. It's like almost everybody I know has at some point, maybe, I don't know, it'd be interesting to do a poll on how many people started getting into audiobooks as a result of BookTube, or even just trying it, even if they didn't stick with it, because I feel like it's influenced so many people to try that format.
Definitely. It influenced me.
Yeah, I'm definitely among that number as well. And it wasn't that I was necessarily against it before, is that I wasn't really aware of them. Like it wasn't an option that I imagined. Like when I was younger, I had books on tape, of course, that I would get from the library and put in the tape recorder and listen to. But for some reason, dating myself here, for some reason, after that, I just kind of didn't think about listening to a book. It just wasn't something on my radar. So BookTube definitely influenced that. And possibly also age, because the older you get, the less time you have to sit down, right? Speaking of time. So if I really want to consume a story, I might even start physically, do a little bit audio, like test and see if I like the audio. If I find myself busy one day or have to do a lot of stuff around the house, I think audiobooks have really filled a space there that I didn't know that there was a gap there, but there was a gap, and they've definitely filled that spot.
Yeah, definitely. Do you listen to audiobooks, PL?
You know, it's funny. My wife is a huge audiobook fan, and she has a much shorter commute now than she has in the past, and she loves listening to audiobooks on her drive. And I was never like Taylor. I always, in my head, I equated audiobooks with being university, and here I'm dating myself too, because I'm probably the oldest person here, is taping lectures in big lecture halls and having to listen to lectures and falling asleep because, like I just wasn't that stimulating. And but it's specifically becoming a writer and having to go through the process of making an audiobook and the whole audition things with the voice actors who, oh my gosh, hats off to all the voice actors. That job is a hell of a lot harder than it looks, right? So, but yeah, just that whole experience of producing an audiobook and listening to my own audiobook, which I like. Obviously, I'm biased, but the actor, like, I actually had two voice actors, one Adam Curtin and the other Sean Polite. And Adam Curtin does a lot of the main character's voice, and he just captures that, rude, snarky, privileged, upper crust, disdainful, dripping with sarcasm, that main character, and I loved it. And after that, that's when I started to actually listen to a couple of audiobooks. I'm still not there yet where audiobooks are my preferred way to consume books, but now I will definitely listen to more audiobooks in the future after that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Yeah, I had to come around. I'll be honest, because the first audiobook I ever listened to was Harry Potter because I was on a road trip with my sister, and I had already read the books years before, some of them multiple times. And when I heard this British man doing Hermione's voice, it just grated on me. I couldn't handle it. I thought that is not how she sounds. And so I just fought the experience so hard. The first time I ever listened to an audiobook, there was this part of my brain that just clashed with it. And then I came around to it again. I think, actually, I don't even know if it was necessarily BookTube. I think the first full audiobook I listened to, I always forget because my brain just doesn't remember. I don't know, it's been so long now. But I think the first audiobook I actually listened to was nonfiction. It was This Is Your Brain on Music. And I did that for a class. And so that just worked for the class, but it was nonfiction. So it didn't really matter about tone and inflection and all of that so much. But then I got back into trying it out again, thanks to BookTube. And then I listened to Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane, narrated by Neil Gaiman, and I was swept away. I didn't know about apps for audiobooks, so I actually checked out the CDs from my library and I was listening to it in my car, and I just wanted to keep driving because I loved it so much. And then I realized I was in love. And then from that point on, I've been off and on. Actually, I go through moods. I go through moods where I'm really into audiobooks, and then I go through moods where I'd rather just read visually and not really listen at all. But yeah, I've really changed my tune on that. And it's just fascinating to see how much it's influenced people and influenced myself. So,
I
yeah.
think I think also, just like we talked about different books for different times, right? Some books just don't work as audiobooks for me. They just don't. And I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that not everything has to work in both formats.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll pick up an audiobook and the narrator is just not for me, or something about it isn't clicking. And I'm like, okay, this is a physical read then. And then I decide to pick something else up via audio. I mean, things that really work for me always via audio are, I'm glad you mentioned nonfiction. That works really well for me on audio, and thrillers. I don't like to physically read thrillers after listening to audio thrillers, actually. It's so much more engaging for me. So I went through a huge audiobook thriller phase. I guess also because I don't tend to reread those. So usually the books that I buy, I hope to reread at some point. We'll see who has time for all of that. But so I think audiobooks really, like I said, fill a space that I didn't know was there. But yeah, sometimes they just don't work for you. You listen to a narrator, you're like, yeah, it's not going to work for me this time.
Yeah, that happened to me earlier this year. There's a book called Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. It's and I feel like I did myself such a disservice listening to the audiobook because it just didn't, something about the narrator did not work for me at all. And I think it really ruined the experience of what could have been a great read, because I think there were some beautiful descriptions in that book. And it was entertaining. It was an entertaining read, but at the same time, there was something about the audiobook narrator's voice that just didn't work for me. So that can happen. Yeah, and it's interesting. I think what you said is just right on, Taylor. But it's interesting because I do think it is a skill. So I know that Derry said something about that, about how fast you get. I go through phases too where I just can't pay attention. And so like what Taylor said too, nonfiction and thrillers work so well. They work so much better for me too with audiobook. Fantasy is a lot harder. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, with those massive character lists and you don't get the visual benefit like the maps and things like that. Like I feel like that's what you miss out on audio. You with a physical copy, especially in fantasy, because it's so immersive, you have this world building. You can flip back and look at an appendices or a map or a character list of, oh, who's this character again? Okay, I can dump through and you can't. It's the same thing with electronic books with Kindles and things like that. I found as I get older, I'm really physical books is what my preferred. Steve did a great video about why I prefer physical books, and I'm totally on board. Like there's nothing like the feel of a physical book. There's nothing like the look of it. I'm becoming a book somewhat a book hoarder. My wife can probably hear somewhere that, but like I love books and I love the look and feel of them. And when you pick up a book like this, like I said, Jenny's book with this amazing cover and, it's just, there's just nothing like it. And sitting there, a cozy corner, it's just nothing like it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. A physical book cannot be replaced. I've been using my ebook for travel, a lot, and that is extremely convenient. And I will not deny how much that's helped me get to books I wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. But there is nothing like turning a page, There
Yeah.
just really isn't.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I go back and forth. I sometimes read ebooks and then sometimes physical and sometimes audio, sometimes both. Sometimes I do immersion read. If I read fantasy and I'm going to use an audiobook, then I have to immersion read because I just can't keep the picture and the names. I have to see the names of the characters and see the map. But sometimes, like if it's Steve Pacey for First Law, then it's worth it for me because then the narrator is just too brilliant. It's like I just have to. I don't think my own inner narrator can do it justice like the way Steve Pacey can. Yeah. Cool. Fascinating conversation. I also wanted to thank Austin so much for this very kind comment. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun for me. This has been my dream to do something like this for a long time. And I have to say that you three are a huge inspiration to me because I've really enjoyed all of your discussions. I think that all three of you are so engaging and so great with your audiences, with self-published authors, and with chats, with community. And so it was just a dream for me to do something like this. So I think we're going to probably bring this to a close here. If there are any closing comments any of you want to share.
I just want to say thank you for inviting us. It's great to be here. And thanks everyone who came by in the chat too.
Yeah.
Yeah, just seconding that. That was exactly what I was going to say. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having us. This has been a great conversation. I learned a lot of food for thought. So I really appreciate you having this, this platform and inviting us on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanna. It's just amazing, and obviously I get to hang out with two of my favorite people, with Taylor Swift. So that's a benefit. But I just want to say, Joanna, your channel just continues to gain in popularity, and you do such wonderful content, and you should be really proud of the work you're doing, and you should really, hats off to you. That you've created this space. And a lot of people have taken notice, so I'm sure it's just gonna continue growing in popularity. So kudos to you.
No, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And thank you everybody in the chat. Appreciate you all so much. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope you'll join us again. We're going to be doing another Why Read episode. They probably won't happen every single week, but we are going to have another one. I think it's going to be next weekend, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and the 23rd. With AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon and Philip Chase. Nice. So please check that out. That'll be during the day. I think I'll post the time later on this week, but I think that's going to happen in the afternoon. So thank you all so much for joining us here, and have a lovely rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.